echoing.
So someone is not muted.
You muted?
I was muted. It was the speaker.
Mine's done that before where it's been muted, but it...
I'll just watch on the big screen.
All right, so we are...
Ryan, are we ready? Yep. We start?
You can start it.
Recording.
Recording in progress.
So we'll just give it a minute or two for people to log on. We are currently at the Millennium Building in person and online for our second community conversation associated with the townwide facilities assessment and master plan. We have about 8 or so people on the Zoom still logging on, so we'll give it another minute. All right, so welcome. We are currently in person at the Millennium Building with Tecton Architects. I'm Kristen Last, the town manager, assistant town manager Mike Edwards, permanent town building committee member Tom Wimberg, director of facilities Jeff Goodwin, and we do have several members in the audience here and about 12 members online to have our second community conversation related to the town of Westford facilities assessment and master plan. So I will turn it over to our architects, Rebecca and Jeff, to lead the presentation, and then we will definitely have some time for one survey. I know last time we had several surveys. We'd pared that down a little bit and then save some time at the end for communications, for feedback and conversation. So Rebecca and Jeff, I will turn that over to you. And if you're in the audience and you do have a comment when we are providing comment, if you could just come to the microphone. WestfordCAT is also taping this for replay.
Thank you, and good evening. So, quick introduction from an agenda standpoint. We'll introduce myself and Jeff quickly, but we're really gonna touch on the process overview, the steps we've taken to date, and kind of what we have on the road ahead. We will be kind of reviewing some of the feedback that we heard at our first community conversation. As Kristen mentioned, we did do some virtual interactive surveys. Those were subsequently posted on the project website, so we got an influx of additional responses, so we'll kind of go through those results, and then we'll talk about where we are today. This will include some possible solutions. These are not all of the options, but a few of them that were developed in conversations with different department heads and town leadership. So we want to kind of get some initial feedback and thoughts on some of these potential options and scenarios. And then again, as Kristen mentioned, we'll open it up for discussion and some feedback. So with that being said, I'm Rebecca Hopkins. I'm a project manager and an associate with Tecton Architects, and with me today.
And I'm Jeff McElravy, principal with Tecton Architects.
And please feel free, I know it's a little bit of a formal presentation, but if you guys have questions or comments, please interrupt us via the chat, or if you guys just want to let us know, come right up to the mic. We intend for this to be a little bit more conversational, so if there's something that you have a question on, just please chime in. So process overview, there's 4 kind of major pieces of this feasibility assessment and master plan. So we have completed our existing conditions study for 9 specific facilities that were identified. This builds on some other concurrent or past studies that have looked at other town buildings, and those also included some existing conditions and some potential solutions. So as a part of future phases and as a part of our process right now, we're kind of gathering all of that information together to make sure that this is comprehensive. But our scope included completing 9 facilities existing conditions assessments. So that step has been done. The second step that has been completed is programming and space needs. So we met with all of the town departments that reside within Town Hall, all of the departments that currently have space within the 9 facilities that we looked at, and we talked about the current space needs, the challenges, and also what the future might hold. That we created, from those conversations, we created a document that had kind of a list of rooms with a set square footage based on the requirements that they shared, and that gave us a sense of kind of what is that need that we need to ultimately solve for, in addition to the improvements and repairs that we noted during the existing conditions assessment. So those kind of two pieces come together as a foundation for where we are today is the master plan and utilization. So we are in kind of within this step of the process. That's why we're kind of today talking about some of those high-level scenarios and solutions and options, ultimately moving towards a few of those being incorporated into this overall report, and then those will help drive the capital improvement plan for the next 10 years. And that capital improvements plan we've talked about as a group is what we want to ensure is that that is a working document, so that it is not just a snapshot in time, that as you kind of go through each of those projects or all of those potential improvements, you can update them, add more, and can continue to look ahead at the next 10 years. So we do have a project website. This presentation tonight is actually already up on that website. So that is there for reference. Our presentation from our first community conversation is also up there. We also included some initial findings videos, which are 3 to 5 minutes long, and they summarize some of those major key themes as a part of that existing conditions assessment. So those are up there. This again is all incorporated into a much larger, comprehensive document that captures, all of the detail from vintages to systems to kind of those useful life components that we like to note kind of on all the pieces. We look at the exterior, interior, and kind of every little piece of those buildings. So all of that detail is included in the overall draft report, again, all on the project website. As a part of this overall process, we talked about kind of those 4 major pieces or phases. We've also been engaging with not only the community through these community conversations, but also doing some leadership workshops, some department head workshops, and a lot of what is coming out of those discussions is what we're using from a foundational or basis for these discussions. So again, trying to get a lot of different perspectives to kind of build a more holistic solution that kind of takes into consideration what everyone is concerned about or what everyone is challenged by or the opportunities that they see. So we started off with a kickoff in summer of 2024, where we subsequently kind of completed those 2 phases that I noted, the existing conditions assessment and programming, and then we really took a deep dive into all of these workshops, really going through the development of potential scenarios and options, testing out certain combinations, and now kind of moving in eventually into option refinement. So we're somewhere kind of in the middle here, but working towards, we're going to continue all of these touch points all the way through past your town meeting and kind of into the springtime. So overall master planning goals is we want to create a comprehensive master plan for all public buildings that are included that serve the town's need for the next 10 years. We want to assess the current use and those space needs, but we also want to establish a priority, a schedule, and a budget for the replacement, consolidation, or improvement, whatever that solution ultimately looks like. And that will create a framework for the town's capital plan. We built on these kind of foundational goals from a town department head standpoint, but also as a community. So one of our first activities during our first community conversation was to prioritize some of these goals and really identify what is most important, not only to the staff, but also to the community at large. And there were some similarities between the top 5 responses. So some of those key items include prioritization of needs. What does that mean? Is making sure that the departments or the buildings with the most need, we are conscientious that those solutions move up to the top. So we'll talk somewhat in some of these scenarios is that one project may be required to then solve for another department. Well, we want to make sure that that is taking into consideration the needs of each of those groups, and what those with the greatest need are kind of coming to the front of that process. Customer experience and service. This was number 2 for both groups, really focusing on accessibility, clear wayfinding, so that when you arrive to any of these town facilities, you know where you're going. It's easy to access the services that you are seeking, and being conscientious of the spaces that are shared between the staff and the public. Inclusive and inviting public experience, that kind of leads right into number 3. Again, the same for both groups. The community did talk about kind of their number 1 priority being utilization efficiency. And I think that speaks to looking very strongly at what we have today and how we can better utilize that or leverage those spaces before we try to build something new or to add an addition on to any of those buildings. So how can we make the use of our space within each of these facilities the most efficient? And we are talking about some pieces of that aren't necessarily architectural in nature. And that kind of rose to a top priority for the town staff and talking about storage resolution and digitization. There's a lot of space that is dedicated to file storage, archive storage, and although in some cases that is necessary and it's a requirement to keep paper copies, in other cases those can be digitized. So coming up with a system that allows for us to free up some of that physical space by digitizing that storage, allowing for a more efficient use of that environment for other office needs or other department needs. A few other things to note is quality and equity of space. Again, getting back to ensuring that kind of all of the different town facilities are up to the same standard, have the same types of spaces, same types of finish, are maintained to the same kind of level. And looking for opportunities for collaboration, flexibility, future growth, trying to right-size that so you're not overbuilding for the future today, but you've got the flexibility and the scalability as those departments and those services evolve over time. The second piece of the first community conversation focused on delivery of service. And this interactive survey, it did tend to ask more questions about town hall, specifically in the departments there. And some of the feedback we received kind of as just via comments or questions during that conversation is we should also kind of ask those same questions for all of the other town buildings. So that's something that we're going to be looking to continue to incorporate. We did focus on town hall because that does house a lot of those customer facing departments. And here's some of the feedback that we received. So the first question being, how frequently do you visit town hall? And 31 folks, so a majority, stated rarely. And this definitely shifted after those who were answering online, but that was the overall takeaway from this question. The second being, which departments or services do you visit most often? So town clerk definitely rose to the top pretty quickly, and that was pretty consistent across the board. During the meeting, we actually had a community member raise the point that we should also include board meetings. So we quickly revised this question because I think a lot of people go to town hall for board or committee meetings, not necessarily to a department for another item. And that actually also kind of resulted in a lot of responses. So I think that, it tells us that there's different times of day with different groups of people, and there could be kind of that influx of folks during certain times. Please.
So you said it was a conversation. I'm just curious if the town tracks how often people visit different departments and that sort of thing. I mean, this is survey, but is there more concrete?
We don't really track at this point in time who's coming to town hall. We are trying to track with our new hours, being open late on Tuesday nights if people are coming into town hall, but we don't ask our staff to tally down, how many people visit their windows on a daily basis.
So the third question, I think, was how often do you visit these other town facilities? So this is where we did start to kind of say, are there other buildings that you frequent outside of town hall? And for the most part, the answers were pretty infrequently. I think there's probably a sprinkling of, I visit Council on Aging or the police department for a very specific need, but not as frequently as town hall. So these were all of these answers kind of were pretty infrequently or rarely to never in these cases.
We do have a raised hand. Mike,
Please.
I'm wondering if you could unmute Megan O'Connell, who has her hand raised, if she wants to speak to this.
Megan?
Hello, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Go ahead, Megan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you, Megan.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Respond in the chat, maybe.
Yeah, we can just want to chat her that we can hear her, but she can't hear us.
Hello? Oh, okay.
Two things. Just to follow on with what I believe it was Heather mentioned. I understand you said that we haven't been collecting data about how often people visit different departments, but why don't we do that for a period of time, say 1 month or 2 months, and collect that data? Because that ties in with my second point, the survey results. I think it looks like there's maybe 50 respondents out of a town of, 18,000 registered voters. So I'm not really sure that that is significant to tell us anything, quite frankly. So those are my 2 comments.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the next question and results were, would it be more convenient if any of these standalone departments were co-located within Town Hall? Kind of answers across the board. Technology department is definitely one that folks had identified it would be convenient if they were kind of co-located. Public Works, I'm assuming from an administrative level, is kind of what it felt like the discussion kind of focused around, and then Council on Aging, School Department, so some of those were some of the higher answers in each of those categories. When you visit Town Hall, do you typically interact with one department or multiple departments? And by a large majority, one department. And this was an interesting conversation. We shared some of this feedback with the department heads during our follow-up workshop. And I think from a customer service standpoint, we had an interesting conversation about kind of the typical taxpayer or citizen and why they're visiting Town Hall, and typically kind of going to one department versus the customer who may be a contractor in town who is bouncing between the building department or the Board of Health and may be more likely to visit multiple departments, and kind of differentiating between what customer we're talking about and kind of what that experience looks like for each group. So that was actually a pretty interesting conversation with Board of Health and a few of the other departments that are kind of in that role. Land use, building, conservation, assessors, they're kind of, they work with a lot of different groups of people, and how are they servicing each of those customer bases. So that was kind of fruitful in how we ultimately potentially solve for some of that, that circulation and how you're kind of interfacing with each department. The next question, and in each of these were kind of categorized in different topics. We moved to asking about digital or online services and how likely are you to use them if there was a digital or online service for certain pieces. And it seemed to be kind of leaning towards very likely or likely in this case. And we did talk, there were some comments about complexity of the types of service and, the usefulness of and the importance of making sure that is very user-friendly and different generations' comfort with technology. So I think those are all things that have to be considered as a part of any solution. The next was, would you prefer a single point of contact to help you access these services? Kind of piggybacking off of if you visit Town Hall and you consistently visit multiple departments, would one single kind of gatekeeper of sorts be helpful or not so much? So it seemed like there was a strong preference to not have a single point of contact, and that most folks who are visiting Town Hall or those departments are going for a specific department and currently enjoy being able to go directly to that department and not kind of have to go through a concierge of sorts, a single point of contact as you kind of enter central reception, as you kind of enter any town office facility. This was a little bit of a more of a design question, talking about different types of public amenities or public attributes to the spaces within the town facilities and the town hall, is what would be most important to you. And I think it kind of came across loud and clear in the priorities, and then was reiterated here is accessible parking and entry, clear marked signage and wayfinding, making it easy for folks to know where to go, and be able to easily access those services. In addition to that, flexible meeting space for public and private use, and spaces for sensitive conversations. I think that's something we heard not only from a space needs from the department, is that we've got the large meeting room and we've got a medium-sized meeting room, but we're missing some of those flexible, smaller group spaces where if I just want to have a one-on-one conversation, can I step aside into a private environment? What does that look like? As well as kind of comfortable waiting areas for if there is a queue at the department that you are currently visiting. So those were the results of the community conversation. Again, I think we are going to do a full summary document of all of the results, and we can upload that to the project website. Those are accessible on the project website still, and the activity that we're going to do tonight will also be accessible again through that project website. Any questions, please?
You've alluded several times to this project website, and I'm just wondering where it is. Is it on the town's website?
Yes, so if you're on the town's website and you scroll down a little bit, we have a tab called Special Projects. So we have the strategic plan, the Boston Road project, and the facilities assessment.
Okay.
If you click on facilities assessment, it's there. The link is also in the flyer that we've been circulating around.
Okay, so it's under special projects?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because I know people do go onto the town website and look at different things. The Boston Road project right now is getting a lot of
Yep.
play.
So it's right next to that on the
Okay,
town's
great.
website.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you
And
for asking.
the link is www.westfordma.gov/facilities
Yeah,
assessment.
facilities assessment. Okay, thank you.
Great. So, assessing town building utilization. So we're going to talk a little bit about the buildings themselves, and then we're going to talk about scenarios and options. So, what matters most? So let's just do a recap of the buildings. Now, it does include additional buildings outside of the 9 that we looked at from an existing conditions assessment. But when we're looking at utilization, we want to look a little bit more comprehensively. I mentioned there's a few other buildings, like the library, for example, that have other studies that are ongoing, other projects that are ongoing. We want to make sure that we're looking kind of at all of those. What are the potential results of those studies, and kind of how, each building and each town asset could potentially be available, what are the opportunities, the challenges, really kind of put everything out on the table to kind of see where everything shakes out. What's the most cost effective, the most efficient, so that we can really kind of weigh the pros and cons of each option. So,
Rebecca, I do have a hand up. I'm going to
Sure,
unmute Phil
absolutely.
Harmon.
please.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious. You talked about putting more online services, and I was just curious, what online services, in addition to what's already there, would you add?
Sure. So, right now we do have online building permits. We do not have online health permits. We do not have online dog licensing. We do not have online common victualler or liquor licensing. We don't have a lot of other documents scanned for others to access online. We do have property record cards through the assessor's office, but there are a lot of opportunities to do more business online where people currently either have to mail something in or come to the counter.
Okay. I was just curious. It seemed like there was plenty of things online already. It didn't seem like there was a great need for additional stuff, but that makes sense now. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. So from a facility standpoint, we did, again, kind of looking comprehensively. We know that the schools have a study right now between Robinson and Abbott, and they're looking at things over here in this area. We know that, again, the library's got an ongoing project, the fire department. There's a lot of, the senior center had a previous study. So taking the results of all of those and kind of looking comprehensively in combination to what we have found and the discussions we have had with the department. So, looking at utilization, a little bit of into the numbers a little bit, is the existing space square footage. So the list on the left is kind of some of those buildings that I just rattled off. The existing space is what is currently available within each of those buildings. These square footages do include basement space. It's kind of every available usable inch of that building. Now, from our standpoint, some pieces of program wouldn't necessarily fit in certain areas. We need to make sure they're accessible, et cetera. So that's kind of our job in making sure that each of these pieces fit correctly. But just this is the existing square footage that is there today. The program need, the second column, denotes the results of some of those conversations that I alluded to as a part of kind of phase 2 of this assessment, the programming and space needs. So this looks at not only the needs today, but also needs into the future. The difference is simply just taking that existing space and comparing it to the programmatic need, or the space needs, and showing the differences. And then we talk a little bit about building capacity and site capacity. And so a few things to note. Building capacity and site capacity. So building capacity is really if we have an existing space and the programmatic need exceeds that space. These all assume that the programs and the departments that are in the buildings today are the same for each column. So we're not proposing moving anything in this scenario. We're just trying to give a sense of what is in town hall today, what are all those departments kind of using up from a square footage standpoint, and what is the programmatic need for all of those departments today and into the future, and how they compare. And we kind of go through each one specifically. So it's kind of apples to apples comparison between existing space and program need. The building capacity essentially highlights whether or not that programmatic need would fit into the existing space as it is today. Now there's a lot of ins and outs in testing and laying out buildings like this. We don't want to go into the detail. We're not ready to go into the detail yet. That will ultimately become a part of this solution where you really see how we're testing out and putting each of these spaces into the building, how we're modifying or tweaking. But really building capacity, it talks about whether or not the building itself as its shell, does it have the size? And then site capacity looks at, do we meet the parking needs? Is there room for growth? And that looks at the overall parcel, setback requirements, any other challenges, and we start to talk about whether or not we feel we can meet all of those requirements. So Town Hall, for example, it is currently a tight site, but we put a little asterisk there because there are some opportunities for additional development. We know that there's kind of a parking expansion plan that's being explored by looking at parcels that are adjacent. If a building is not being utilized or can be kind of leveraged in other ways, that might open up some opportunities on site. So again, this gives you a quick sense, a quick snapshot, but there's layers to each of these pieces. Please.
Is the fire department all 3 fire departments, or all 3 buildings?
So yes, so where we list fire department on this sheet, so the third from the bottom, it's all 3 buildings. So
Okay.
so the new fire headquarters is not under study because that's a brand new building. The Rogers Fire Station is not under this study, and the NAB station is not under this study. That is under a separate study with the Permanent Town Building Committee.
Okay. And then I'm just curious why we have Abbott on there and not some of the other schools. Like, how does that fit into this?
Yep, the Abbott is on there, and I'll let Rebecca explain as well, because Robinson and Abbott are currently under potential feasibility study if town meeting votes for that on March 22nd at town meeting. So that is just a potential scenario that we're looking at. So we want to frame the conversation that Abbott may be available if that study moves forward. We don't want to put that off the table, and we will show some other scenarios moving forward, potentially using that building, but all scenarios do not rely on Abbott.
Wouldn't that be pretty far out, though?
It
as
would be.
opposed to when this project would.
Well, this project that Tecton is doing for us is really a 10 to 15 year capital plan. So if we see a Robinson-Abbott combination, that may be in the next 5 to 7 years, and that would fall within the timeline of this study.
And that's a great point about kind of the pros and cons of each of these solutions. You know, if a solution is reliant upon other enabling projects, you know, it may push that out to a point where it's not feasible or it doesn't meet the need on the timeline that kind of best suits the town. So those are all things that we kind of have to consider, and why it's kind of important to look a little bit holistically, even if an idea initially feels like, oh, I don't know if this is really the right idea. It's good to talk about it and really weigh those pros and cons so you can kind of see them next to each other.
Rebecca, there's another question while we're on this slide from Donna Diogivine. I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. Can you give an example of a programmatic need? It looks like the town hall needs 50% more space. What would that be used for?
Sure. So a programmatic need is simply, so a programmatic need is synonymous for a space need. So a programmatic need would be a proper break room or a meeting space or additional office space for a additional workstation. So it is simply a space requirement of a department within town hall that they currently do not have today. And this increase includes kind of all of the needs it's comprehensive. So Department X needs a individual office and a shared office with 3 workstations and a storage room. That would be the programmatic needs of that department, and each of those would have a size, and those are kind of totaled to come to that kind of 27,000 square feet or thereabouts.
Tom, do you want to add to that?
Yes. No, question.
Sure.
Does the programmatic need include departments being relocated to town hall?
No.
Okay.
So the programmatic need, so when we write a space needs requirement for let's say on town hall, we try to do it in a way that is isolated from its current condition. So we have a clean statement of these are the department needs.
Mm-hmm.
We can then take that and layer it into, okay, this is the building, this is what the building has available. Can I fit those spaces in there? Or today they have some of that, but not all of that. So I have to solve for the delta. We want to get that holistic view so we can kind of see the full picture instead of just saying, okay, this is just what's needed, and we don't look at what they have today. So it's a kind of a big
for
picture.
example, the technology department, there's a land there. So that's where you're doing the technology department.
Yeah, so the technology department, their existing space is 2,000.
Yeah.
The spaces that they talked about, they need more than that. And so exactly, so that kind of is why the delta is really the difference. And one thing I did want to note about the Rodenbush Community Center, that currently houses a plethora of community center programs, but it also includes the recreation department. So the programmatic need differential here, although the community center programs take up most of that facility, the recreation department does exist up on that 3rd floor, and they have additional space needs. So that difference you see there is directly tied to the recreation department, not the community center.
And the existing and program needs are, the 3rd floor is the existing size.
The 3rd floor is 4,000 square feet. So the existing space is all the basement, 1st, 2nd, 3rd floor. It's a comprehensive. So the existing space is the entire building. The community center takes up 20, thereabouts. It takes up like 18 to 19,000 square feet of that. 4,000 of that is designated for a recreation department up on the 3rd floor.
Okay.
So that you did answer a question that came in. How is a programmatic need assessed for the Rosenbusch Community Center? So that's one of the asterisks. You also addressed the town hall asterisks of the site capacity. There is a town hall parking study out there. So another question came in about the asterisks. Those are what those two mean. I don't think we have any other asterisks on this chart at this point in time. And then one other question is, how are the needs justified, or are they just a wish list? So Tecton met with all of the departments. They identified what their needs were. Tecton, as professional architects, assessed those. They've done this work in many communities, so they kind of vetted out wish list versus actual needs based upon them seeing the space as well as meeting with the departments. And then the town manager's office further reviewed those to cull down, are they really wish list or are they justified? So we did go through a 3-tiered process to understand the programmatic needs, and I think that they were fully flushed out.
And as a part of that conversation, we also looked for opportunities for sharing
For
space.
combination, right? Like copy rooms, break rooms. Every department wanted their own conference space. We cut that way, way back.
Yes.
So things were definitely reviewed very
Consolidated,
carefully and consolidated.
Please.
Excuse me. Over the past few years, we've been dealing with the MBTA Communities Act issue and all the empty office space that's in this community. And I just hear you allude to the fact that the rec department has more needs space, and Tom, Dick, and Harry do as well. Would the town consider Could we take some of the empty office space on 110? You know, probably 5 days out of the week, I drive up and down 110, and there's lots of empty office space up there. Could we do something like that rather than building new structures?
Well, I think you'll see in future slides that we're not proposing all the solution being building new structures. It's really renovating what we may have and potentially building that on, but those types of conversations are occurring about leasing space. We actually looked for the library when we were going out to bid to relocate the library off-site off of 110. That's very specific, but leasing office space could be a conversation that we could have with the select board.
Yeah, because I mean, at a certain point, Town Hall is in the center, and it's very much hemmed in by homes, the police department, the library. There's not a lot of room there to move out. Town Hall is one thing that comes to my mind. And so, you know, I'm just thinking, today I was driving up 110, and there's so much empty office space up there. So I don't know, I'm just asking.
No, it's a great comment, and actually, I think you've teed us well for some future slides that are going up that I think will help answer those questions, so thank you.
You going to say something?
Well, I was going to add the comment, one of the things that you do have to keep in mind when you look at this is part of this analysis is really considering the adjacencies, who has to be next to what. So just because we have, say, 11,000 square feet we need in Town Hall, we can't really functionally just pick up 11,000 square feet in a vacant office complex because of the need for those departments to interact with other departments. So that does kind of factor into it also.
Of course it does. Okay, thank you.
Will you, on the town hall and the police department,
Sure.
the old fire station,
Yes.
is that going to be discussed?
Yes.
Okay. Fine.
Yes.
I will be patient.
So Phil Harmon has another question, and then I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. So I'm going to unmute him, and then we'll move on. Okay.
I just wanted to know, hello?
Yes, Phil.
I just wanted to know if the programmatic need is being driven by the expectation of additional staffing, or if it's just the current need of the people involved.
It is a combination of both. So we currently do not have adequate space for our staff. If you walk into the health department or the land use department in town hall specifically, or in the HR department. But this also, like I said before, is going to be a document for the next 10 to 15 years. And we know with the population growing on a year-to-year basis, we will have to have more staff if Westford residents are expecting the same services that they have today. So we are not being overly boastful in that, but we are building in some additional staff capacity for this to be smart about the build out. All right, Rebecca, if you want to move on.
Sounds good. Okay, so we are queuing up to our first activity, which will be a pretty simple one, but it is going to leverage that same virtual tool. It's the only one of the evening. So there will be a QR code and a link you can follow from home. You can type it into a web browser. From your cell phones, you can scan the QR code. It'll bring you right to the site. It's 3 questions, and again, it's the only one of the evening. So why is this discussion important? So we need to understand the value that these buildings hold for the community. And with the kind of the foundational piece that, yes, our existing conditions and professional assessments very much matter, and they are going to impact ultimately our recommendations. But your perspective is also very important for us to understand. And this perspective isn't always objective. Sometimes it's subjective in nature. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of these buildings and if, what they mean to you as a community, to your community's identity, and kind of what value or significance they hold. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into the Mentimeter, and we're going to kind of define what we mean for each question and then ask 3 questions. So bear with me as I jump over, but this is the website and the QR code. So if folks want to start getting queued up now, I will then move over.
And there is a question while you're moving over from Bob Jeffries. Does the program need for space include any consideration of space for community TV, both cable and internet? Has any discussion included creating a department of utilities for town-run communications and provisions of electric power? So I'll attempt to answer that. So I know I have been approached by Sarah Fletcher of WestfordCAT and a board member about potentially using some town space if it were to be built out. That has not currently been part of Tecton's study, but we are receiving that feedback tonight, so we will go and revisit that and understand that further. And they're definitely in my realm. I have not had any discussions about a Department of Utilities for town-run communications and electric power. Currently, we are serviced by National Grid, Verizon, and Spectrum. Perhaps the Communications Advisory Committee had those conversations. So Bob, if you want to give me a call offline, or we can have a further discussion about if that has been brought up before, I'd love to explore what that actually means.
And so while Rebecca's queuing that up, I just want to give a little insight. You know, we talked about the department head workshops that we've had. The questions that you're going to be answering tonight, that we're going to, the topics we're going to be discussing tonight were actually discussed with the department heads previously. So it's going to be neat for us to compare answers and see where community values lie, and where there may be commonality or differences with what the department head's viewpoint is. But, you know, I can tell you, having worked now for 38 years doing public buildings, you know, you can take a very pragmatic view of all the buildings and, you know, and say what's most efficient or most cost effective, but what the community feels about itself is so important. You know, they're the pieces of a community that create that identity. And so this first question is really about understanding that. And that's as much time as I can drag that out for.
Perfect. Great. So, I'm gonna present just so everyone's with me again. Great. So, this is also self-driven, so if you've jumped ahead of me, that's totally fine. So, the next question is saying, you know, does this building hold significance? What do we mean by that? And Jeff started really to kind of dive into that. So, does this building, does its design help define the character of Westford? Does it hold historic value and contribute to the town's identity? Is its architecture make it a recognizable landmark? Are the spaces inside, have they served the community for generations? You can't imagine not having town services at that location within town, for example. Westford would not be the same without it. So that's what we mean by significance. So this question, does this building hold significance? Yes or no? So this is a binary question. This list continues onto the next slide. And it is just a continuation, same question, just a continuation of the building lists. And I'm gonna keep going just so that people who are jumping ahead of me get the explanation, but.
Yeah, and I put the menti.com and the 58694683 code in the chat for anyone who needs it.
Great.
Where's the facilities garage?
On Beacon Street.
Okay. And where is the technology facility?
The old.
It's at the railroad tracks on East Prescott Street, where the old fire station was.
Right,
So I don't really think I know where you
it's right across from Presti Pizza.
Okay, I'm just, okay.
That's all I remember.
Because some of these places, nobody knows.
All my landmarks.
I mean, everybody knows where the road
So
is.
how can you say that the highway garage is significant? You never really go.
Then maybe it's not significant to you.
Oh, it definitely is. We paid a lot of money for it.
There you go. So it's significant to you.
Well, that's the only reason
But
that I
that's what I
said that.
mean, like, it's
I mean,
hard
they
to-
call it the Garage Mahal, you know that, right?
Actually, that's a different, the facilities garage is where the facilities maintenance team operates out of. The garage you're referring to
It's
is,
up on the,
North
that's
Street on a
28,
hill.
that's the DPW highway building.
that's what they refer to as the Garage
That,
Mahal.
that is the
Yes.
garage
I'm
mahal.
so- that is what
Yes.
they,
Yes.
I don't do that, but.
And again, from a significance standpoint, we understand that the services that each of these departments provide have value. It is significant, right? If you invested a lot of money, it is important. But I think what we're really after with these questions, we are going to take all of those things into consideration. What we're really after are those kind of previous statements. Is its identity critical? Could you not ever foresee that service being anywhere else other than that building? Or could you not see that that exterior is just so critical, intrinsic to the identity of Westford that it just always has to have some kind of town service in it? It's a little bit more of a, what I think Mike used, or it tugs at your heartstrings type of question versus like trying to assess that we've invested, we've invested dollars in it, or, that building means much to me because I need the services in the building. It's a little bit of a softer question. So try to keep those things kind of at bay and focus on kind of the, those buildings that are really critical to Westford's character.
Yeah, and if to kind of expand on that a little bit, for example, the garage mahal, as you called it, does it matter to you where it is or what it is, as long as the services it provides are good? If it doesn't matter, then it's not significant from that perspective.
So, I'm seeing some answers across the board here. I'm going to jump into the second question, and we will circle back on results. So, the next question is, what makes it significant? So if you said, yes, this building is significant to me, we're really asking, what about it makes it significant? Is it the design? Is it the exterior, the look, the feel? Is it iconic? Is the tradition of that, just that's what makes it significant to you? Kind of regardless of what's within the building. Or is what's within the building actually what makes it significant? That use, being in that location, is more significant than the exterior itself? Or is it both? Are the two intrinsically tied? Essentially saying, we really don't want you to touch the outside or the inside. It is so critical to who we are in its entirety that it should remain as it is. So, and in this example, we're not asking if the services delivered are significant. Of course they are. It's really about the functions. Do they need to stay there? Did they hold some intrinsic value? So this question really is asking, if it is significant, what about it is driving that significance? And then in this, you have not significant on the far left, then you have design, function, program, or both. And you've got 4 tiers, 1, 2, 3, 4, as your potential options for voting. And again, this question continues onto the next page. And then just to close this out, because then I will come back to all these answers, the last question is, for each of these buildings, is it important that it maintain the same use? So in this example is the police department. Is the police department building, does it have to be police in that building for you? Or would you be okay with another town use or another department moved into that building? Is that okay? Is that acceptable? Yes or no?
And for Center Fire Station, that's unique because currently that is vacant. So there is not currently a use in that building. It was a fire station. It's vacant now. We don't know the fate of it at this point in time. So that one is pretty unique.
That's a great point. And I'm seeing a strong response that it does not need to maintain be a fire station in the future.
Exactly.
So.
That makes sense.
So it does make sense. So I'm going to circle back to the beginning just so we can see as these answers come in how they're kind of adjusting.
And Rebecca, as you do that, we are going to leave this survey open on the website for the next 2 weeks or so. So we'll do another news flash posting tomorrow or Friday to make sure that those who were not able to attend can get to it. And we hope that if you're here on the Zoom or in person, that you will share that page with your friends and family to participate.
So I am just going to start summarizing these results. I know, again, they're going to shift as people add their input and their feedback. So kind of given the midpoint here is 1.5, it seems like majority feel that the Center Fire Station, the facilities garage, the highway department, the technology building do not hold significance, while the police station, close to kind of 50-50, but somewhat. And then the Road and Bush Community Center do hold significance. And then the next set of buildings. So Town Hall, 100% definitely holds significance. Frost School also kind of on that side of things. Old Nab as well, somewhat similar to the police station, a little bit in the middle, so a split crowd there. Library, yes, holds significance. Senior Center, yes, holds significance. Abbott, yes, holds significance. Millennium does not. So that kind of gives us some clear direction on, yes or, just high level, that binary response. And again, we're going to wait for all of the feedback from those online as well. And then the second piece, so if we're diving a little deeper, again, kind of those fire station, facilities garage, highway garage, technology being on the not significant side of things, while the police department looks like it's somewhere between, design and function programs. So it looks like we've got some split responses. Based on the depiction, it actually seems like a bunch of people said not significant or both, and it's just averaging in the middle. So we'll dive deeper into those results to see what's really driving that response. Rodenbush is definitely a strong both for most folks. So it's, the exterior and the function and program. And that will be really fruitful for kind of how we look at that facility going forward. And then technology kind of, again, I mentioned that. And then all of these, town hall, again, both. So its function and its exterior are really both critical to the identity of Westford. Frost also being in that area, library, senior center, Abbott, being function, program, and exterior design. Old Nab kind of right in the middle, but again, it looks like I've got some not significance and some both. So again, we'll dive a little deeper on those results. And then Millennium being a strong not significant. So this is really helpful feedback. And again, we'll wait kind of as people continue to add their input. Same use, so definitely a no for the fire station, which makes sense. Facilities, garage, highway, police, Rodenbush, it seems like it's a little bit of a split crowd on whether it needs to have the same use. Technology, leaning towards the no. Town Hall, yes. Frost, Old Nab, Senior Center, Abbott, Millennium, all kind of fallen in the middle of the pack. So it looks like we've got some split feelings there. But then the library and Town Hall being should remain kind of have similar uses as they have today, or services that they have today. So before I jump back into the presentation, any initial feedback or thoughts? Did anything surprise you based on kind of these questions or results?
I'm surprised we're discussing the Millennium Building because it's past its life, right? Like, I'm surprised that's even.
We are discussing it because there are town and school functions here now. So we just want to make sure that we're all encompassing and we just get that out there, that people know that there's town functions in Millennium. Do people feel like we really want to keep it? If not, just to all encompass everything.
Oh, and to that point, I think there's a gut reaction to some of these, and I think even as professionals, we have an immediate opinion, but we want to make sure that we don't kind of go in with that assumption. We want to at least ask the question for every facility.
Everybody loved it.
We would have to really.
We'd have further conversations to educate. We need further education for people to what that really meant.
Yeah.
This is New England, and we like our things old. I mean, town hall and.
If you don't mind coming to the mic, people from home might not be able to hear you. Thanks.
Town hall, I think, what was it built, 1897 or something like that?
Okay, I guess.
The library, town hall and the library were built in the late 1800s. The Rodenbush, I'm not sure, but this is New England, and we like our things old.
Yeah.
I would say, not to say anything bad about this, but is this a trailer? Like I think it's like a double wide trailer, isn't it? I think, isn't it?
It's a modular building.
It's a
Yes.
modular building.
Okay, not to say anything bad about
It's a fancy word
trailers,
for a trail. Yeah.
but so it just doesn't have the character that a building like the library or the town hall have, and we like it like that in New England.
And this is a piece of the puzzle. So I think to both of your points is we've got to layer in what we saw from the existing conditions assessment. What's the life cycle look like? What's the return on investment? What is that facility, kind of more of that pragmatic side of things. And we want to layer that in with what you guys feel about the building. So it's why we want to be comprehensive and at least ask the question about every facility. But if everyone were to say, oh, we love the Millennium Building, we want to keep it, we want to put a new program in it, we would have to have some conversations about what the challenges of doing that would be and the level of investment required to make this a long-term solution for the town. So we just got to ask the question about everything so that we can kind of compare apples to apples and understand.
Some of us do love these old buildings, and I think at a certain point, though, we do have to say, when do we cut our losses? It's like, when do you put more money into your car or just buy a new car? It's kind of the same thing. And I think a classic example of that in this town is the Cameron Senior Center, which, not to say anything bad about the Cameron, but it's, being held together with duct tape and elastic bands. But, it's a great old building and has a lot of character. But, the HVAC system is definitely well beyond its life. And that building doesn't owe us a dime. But I would hate to see it go.
Yeah.
So I got two comments online. One from Donna. To Megan's point earlier, the number of participants doesn't really provide anything significant other than the opinion of 12 to 50 people among a town with 18,000 voters. And we know we have more people who live here who may use the services such as library, senior center, Road and Bush Town Hall. We are always continuing to try to get the word out about these meetings and surveys. It will be open for another 2 weeks. Donna, we urge you and others on today to share the survey with those that you may know. If people don't have access to a computer, we're happy to help get them linked up with Tecton or the town manager's office to share their ideas and thoughts. And if anyone has any ideas of how to outreach more to our community, we're going through that process right now with a separate communications study. So thank you for that comment. And then Angela Harkness, she's our town moderator actually. She says, people like services to remain in the center. That's why Town Hall, Library, and Road and Bush get the most support for remaining as it is and providing the same services. That's her opinion. So thank you both for those comments.
Awesome. Okay, so I am going to switch back to the presentation, and we are going to dive further into some of these options. So again, just to reiterate, these are not all of the options. There are many options that are on the table. We're going to touch on 4 possible scenarios, and they do have some pieces of them that are a little bit more kind of on one end of the spectrum or another, and that's intentional. We want to kind of test some of these ideas. Are there any non-starters? Are there ideas that are, this is an absolute no, we really shouldn't go any further down this road? This is a brainstorming session, so these are the result of the workshops that we've had with leadership and with the department heads on some of their thoughts on, Mike alluded to some of the critical adjacencies that some of those groups share, kind of how they function, what are their touch points during the day, and kind of how can we move the pieces around, and kind of looking at a clean slate while also considering what's in place today, and trying to find that kind of most effective solution. So.
And we did, a number of very active workshops with the department heads groups, and we started off really testing, the strength of adjacencies. So, we had different clusters of people throughout the room, and we were testing whether or not this department should be directly adjacent to that department, and what does a direct adjacency mean, so that we could really test. If, say, we pick a building and a bunch of people who have a really strong adjacency, they say all these departments really should be together. If they fit, great, right? If they don't fit, then how do we look at the relationship between adjacencies and what can be accommodated in the building? Or does that drive us to a different solution? So that was one big exercise. We were moving people all around the room, having them join their little huddles of direct adjacencies. We also did an exercise where we took boards with all the names of all the different building assets. And having already gone through that adjacency experiment, we said, all right, let's try to test a bunch of ideas. And so I whispered in Kristen's ear that I wanted her to go first because it started the adjacency matrix. And I said, we're going to try different buildings. So we'd put town administration in a building and then see where the adjacencies fell. And then from there, we would see where other people felt they belonged. There were some really consistent answers, and there were some surprising answers. And I think that's what you see ultimately in the 4 scenarios we picked here. There's still a lot of testing to do of all of these ideas, even if we said this sounds great. We really got to test it and figure out that pragmatic aspect of it. So that would be our next step. But right now is getting a real sense of, like Rebecca said, where are the non-starters and where are the possibilities.
And for each of these, and I'm going to do a summary of all 4, and then we'll just do a kind of a little bit of a deeper dive. I think with, when we looked at that utilization chart, there was an immediate, as one of the options is, well, what if everyone just kind of stays where they are today? And what does that look like? Like, we can just kind of renovate, and the capacity is what you were started to be challenged by. So that was why it was also important to understand is, how sacred is that kind of building exterior? If we need an addition, is it even possible at that location, or are there other limiting factors? So again, it's layering of information that ultimately builds to an ultimate solution. And it's important, even if we feel like, oh, this is probably a non-starter, people probably are not going to like this solution, it's important to at least test it, because ultimately when we make recommendations as a part of this master plan, folks are going to ask, well, did you look at this? Oh, did you look at that? And we have to be able to have an answer to, yes, we did, and this is why it didn't work, or this is why it did work, and why it's ultimately a part of one of the final recommendations. So although it may seem like we're throwing a lot of options out there, it's really critical to be able to tell the story and have an actionable framework at the end of the day, and kind of have a reason behind each decision made along the way. So the 4 options. The first one is going to be improving the status quo. So we're going to look at keeping most of the departments and the facilities kind of where they are today and see what that results in. The second, we are going to explore using a larger potential asset. So we are looking at Abbott. What if that was to be available, and what would that look like? What opportunities could that result in? Does it allow for reuse or decommissioning of more assets, so less assets would need to be maintained from a long-term plan? So again, just kind of throwing out some bigger ideas. We look at potentially locating town programs in option 3 within the community center. What does that result in? What are the pros and cons of potentially doing something like that to any variety, to any extent? And then we look at creating a town hall campus. How can we best leverage Center Fire Station? How does police's as a part of that kind of current town campus, what are the limitations of them being on site versus off site? Does that open up any opportunities, or does that kind of add an additional project that's not necessary? So again, we're kind of looking at every option, but these are the 4 we're going to talk about today. So the first one, improving the status quo. So over on the left-hand side, for each of these, the facilities to remain, and these are facilities that are either under separate study or have been identified as kind of a location that it currently serves their needs based on kind of the programmatic discussions we had, with some modifications or some variation thereof. Say that again?
There's been a big investment.
Yes,
there.
there's been a recent big investment. Fire department, that headquarters was just recently built, right? They're going to kind of generally remain in place. And for the simplicity of these options, we've kind of left all of those off to the side. So currently, we're not going to talk about a relocation or anything related to the library, the senior center, the fire department, facilities garage, highway, cemetery, and water. And again, we have some documented needs for some of those, but for this exercise, facilities to remain. In this instance, what would stay at current location? So portions of town hall would stay within town hall. So those functions would stay at town hall, would remain a town facility with town services. The police station would stay at its current location and kind of go down that list. So I think I'm going to talk about the moves, and then we can I think that's the more critical piece, and that's the piece on the right. So as a part of this, we still have a capacity issue. So in this instance, we would look at relocating the technology department out of the technology building into the town hall campus or onto the town hall and police campus. That could either be through leveraging the center fire station building. That could be, we could be looking at pulling town departments out of town hall into the center fire station building, which alleviates and allow for facilities or departments to stay within that building itself. So kind of looking at moving pieces around, but the major move here is to take the technology department and to move them onto the town hall police campus. And we were looking at relocating town administration, HR, accounting, finance, treasurer, collector, assessor, community wellness, and veteran services into the center fire station, and keeping Board of Health, land use, which includes building conservation, et cetera, and the clerk at town hall. Meeting space is also a piece that we talked in depth about with the departments. A few of those departments kind of needing immediate proximity or adjacency given the amount of boards and committees they serve. So land use is one of those groups. So we did talk about, you know, where does that large meeting space ultimately, where is that located, and kind of how do we leverage spaces like the safe that the clerk uses heavily? How can we ensure that we're not rebuilding more expensive square feet like that when it already exists today? Can we expand on where it is? So in this instance, we kept the clerk, land use, and Board of Health within the existing town hall, and some other, you know, other ancillary programs and some of those staff spaces, large meeting space that Jeff mentioned, but then moving a piece of the town hall program into that center fire station location, as well as the technology department, which allows for that technology building to potentially become available for reuse or decommissioning. A lot of the other departments or buildings would stay at their current location. Again, just because we're saying it stays at the current location or it's, you know, available for reuse, that just means that we're not proposing a dramatic move in this option for each of those pieces. There's still probably, there will still be pieces for each of them that become a part of the capital improvements plan. All right, second one.
Skip on?
Huh? You want any question? You want to
Yeah,
ask?
let's wait and get any reactions on it.
Sure. Any initial reactions to option one? No is okay. I will keep going. But
I don't see anything online yet, but Tom has something.
Sure.
How suitable is Central Fire Station for this plan?
That is a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's gonna, it's gonna take a little more work. We're gonna have to evaluate how do you actually get that program to fit and operate effectively. We do know that there's an ADA issue, accessibility to the upper floor,
Yep.
that would have to be addressed as part of that. You know, I think at the end of the day, you've got to evaluate, can reusing it be more cost-effective than replacing it? I don't know the answer to that yet. It depends on how that lays out.
Okay.
But I do know that we have a shortage of space at Town Hall, and by drawing in another asset that happens to be on the same campus, you know, there's a certain sensibility in that.
No, I like, I'm just asking the question.
No,
Yep.
it's a great question, and I
Absolutely.
think, and we're, you know, in our minds, we're rattling through those same questions as, you know, how do we provide connectivity? Because all those, you know, those departments are all still used to working in the same building. So although they're on the same campus, all those town services currently are within town hall.
Yeah,
So-
I'm just trying to remember the connection between,
There's a current, I think it's a walkway now.
is it indoors or outdoors?
Outdoors.
Outdoors.
It's outdoors.
Semi-outdoors,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I think I remember going through the two buildings.
Yep.
Yeah, so just things to consider as a part of that solution. And then the site needs, we kind of talked about that a little bit as a site capacity. You know, if we're keeping all of these departments on site, the police department, we had lengthy conversations with them about kind of their challenges on site from an emergency response standpoint, from a security standpoint. You know, just when you have a large board meeting or committee meeting, just the public accessibility to parking and kind of that, right, that ease of access being one of the top priorities of the community. How do we address that as a part of this solution? So we've got to layer in all of those pieces because although maybe we can make it work from a building standpoint, we may still have some site challenges or some constraints that, you know, may be limiting factors for a solution like this. So things to consider as we kind of explore this option further.
So I still don't see anything online, so I think let's go through the next one, and we can always go back at the end.
Absolutely. So option two, So again, think a big picture. What if Abbott Elementary School were to become available? So in this instance, that school is a larger building. It's upwards of 80 to 90,000 square feet. So in this, I'm going to focus on the moves again. We would look to move all departments from Town Hall to Abbott. So that would include all of the departments, all the town services. We would also move the technology department, as well as all departments from the Millennium Building, which would include facilities administration, school administration, veteran services, et cetera, and potentially also look at relocating the recreation department from the Road and Bush Community Center. And in each of these, in this solution, we are proposing kind of moving everybody, but as we test out these options, maybe pieces and components need to kind of stay where they are. I know from a recreation standpoint, that adjacency within the community center does work well, and I know we've had conversations with the technology department where that kind of administrative level and the technicians could be separated if need be. So there's some flexibility, I think, in kind of how we ultimately solve, but a building like the size of Abbott would allow for us to kind of co-locate a lot of these different services and have a joint town and school administration campus. What that would then result in is freeing up the existing town hall police campus to become a public safety only campus. So we would look to reuse town hall and expand police and kind of make that a police, emergency communications, we can move animal control. There's a few other pieces that could possibly kind of exist on that kind of public safety campus where town hall is today. So still maintaining the facility itself, but looking at different function within that building. This would potentially make the center fire station, the technology building, the Millennium Building, all available for reuse or decommissioning. Again, that center fire station is on the same campus as town hall and police, but kind of given the space needs of the police department and kind of the potential value of the town hall, that would be the asset we would look to leverage first prior to the center fire station, and then again solving for those other site needs. Staying in the same location, you would still look at the community center would stay in the same location, and the Frost School and Old Nab School, which are childcare centers, would also stay in the same location.
And this would, reduce parking need on site. What it would also do is the additional program that was identified for police would not fill the town hall. So we would still have available space, which may be opportunities for, looking at some other functions, but, right now that program would not fill both buildings.
Yep.
Reactions, thoughts?
So there is a question online, there's two questions. One I think is overall and one is specific to this scenario, option two. The first is from Bob Jeffries. Bob, I'm going to read it. If I don't get it right, please either retype or I'll unmute you. Can you research the architectural awards, the original design of Town Hall with the new fire station and the police station emulating house, linking building, and barn? It was considered a very early postmodern building at the time. And Jeff may have some history on that, but we'll take that note.
Yeah.
And then the other question is from Donna. What would happen to the Road and Bush building under this scenario? It is not on the available for reuse list. So this is stays at the current location list for Road and Bush in this scenario, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
The only piece would be recreation. Could possibly be a part of that or not. I think we would have to look at kind of the available space. Great. Did you want to address the first
It's a
question?
little confusing because only a piece needs to be housed by the town. The community center is a separate entity, so
Can you
I'm struggling to
come
see
to the
how
mic?
I'm struggling to see how you've teased out the part in Roden Bush that relates to the town and the separate community center, which is its own entity.
As in a square footage requirement?
Well, that and like when it stays at location, you're just talking about the community center, which is its own thing. Are you talking about Parks and Rec as well? Both?
Talking about recreation going to Abbott in this scenario, and Road and Bush Community Center staying in the Road and Bush building in this scenario.
Does anybody, okay, please go ahead.
So I think what you've said is that you want to take everybody, I think everybody from Town Hall and put them in the Abbott,
Yep. And this
um,
option,
which is an it's an elementary school,
elementary school.
which is a very beautiful building. And I think you said it's 80 to 90,000 square feet. And so I think if you take everybody from Town Hall and put them there, what would that fill up? Half of it? It's a pretty big building, isn't it?
It'll
Gets
fill up
pretty
most
close
of
to
it.
filling all of it.
Will it fill
with-
most of
with
it?
school facilities
With
as
school
well.
admin. So
And
that
te- and
includes
technology.
Millennium.
So
it
you're gonna get rid
includes-
of this,
Yep.
and you're gonna, okay.
And
Yes.
technology goes in there as well.
Okay, so you're saying that the square footage would pretty much be used up?
Yes.
Okay, so where are all the little kids gonna go? What are you gonna do with all the little kids?
Have a
This
separate
only
study.
happens-
Is that option number 3?
Only happens.
So Tom, go ahead.
Actually, I can answer
please.
Where are
that.
you putting all the little kids?
I was just about to make a comment. If you go on the town website, there's another, was it special projects?
It's not yet under a special project, so
Project.
right now, under the Robinson School Building Committee.
Yeah, you have to look at the Robinson School Building Committee. There is and I don't think I can do its justice. I happen to be on that board, on that committee too, is we're looking at ways to replace Robinson. Because the Robinson is the most problematic school that we have in our portfolio.
Yes, that's the buzz around town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my kid went there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the Commonwealth likes is fewer school buildings. And there's also discussion about the transition between
Pre-K to 2 and 2
and
to
3.
3 to 5, yeah.
So it would be, that that one of the options in that committee, and this is where I was going to say, there's a committee on, study happening here, is one of the things that's being discussed there is combining Robinson and Abbott into a K-5.
Combining them, the school committee's having a discussion about
Uh-huh.
the age groups and the grades of the children, and then the Robinson School Building Committee is talking about this MSBA project that will be on the town meeting on March 22nd to study the feasibility of leaving Robinson as is, renovating it, building a new Robinson, or building a new Robinson / Abbott in one location. So that's why we're talking about Abbott in this scenario.
This scenario could only happen if
Yes.
That happens.
Absolutely correct.
happen,
Yep.
which means that this scenario is only possible
Yes.
if that other study decides, and the town agrees, that we should build a new K-5 school that replaces both Robinson and Abbott.
Oh, do you know where that would go?
It's being studied.
It's
That-
being
it's-
studied.
It's being
Well,
studied,
it's going to
and
be studied if town meeting approves the study.
If town meeting approves the study, and one of the possible
So
locations.
there's no idea yet, okay,
No, there's two
possible.
two possibilities?
The possible locations are the Robinson School
School.
campus right now,
Yeah.
or potentially where this building is now. That's what's being currently discussed, but we're not underway yet.
Oh, okay. This doesn't seem like it's probably a big enough area, but okay.
Well, that's why we're going to be studying.
Okay.
That's a question I'm
Okay.
interested in too, because I
this
assume you're
option-
aware, I assume you're aware of that other study.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Because some of the square footage here and the parking here might be compromised by the presence of another school building here.
Sure. Yeah, and I think to your point, the outcome or recommendations of that group
Yeah.
would critically affect even the plausibility of this solution. But I think it was
And-
worth at least throwing out an option that it looked at it as a possibility,
Right.
and that would take further coordination between
And
our
that would
groups.
be several years down the road if the town even agrees to do the study.
Well, to get back to what I said, like, about an hour ago, would it be fiscally a better move for the town to get square footage, which is already in existence, up on Route 110, rather than building a whole new school? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Those are numbers that have to be crunched, but it's a possibility if the town will entertain locating municipal functions.
Because there's a
in
lot of
this
empty space up on 110, which, I don't know.
So
And also, if we take space on 110,
Yeah.
we're losing tax base as well, because then that wouldn't be taxable right now, even though the buildings are vacant.
But they're
those-
vacant. How long have they been vacant? They've
But those
been,
owners are still paying property tax. If the town were to purchase those buildings, they would not be taxed. So that's also a careful balance that we'd want to
are
consider.
they paying their full property tax, though? Are they getting
If
some-
they're vacant, no, it's not full property
Okay,
tax,
so
but
they're-
it is.
So it's not,
tax.
it's not really what they owe. They're getting some sort of a break, which I understand. Some of these buildings have been empty for years. But so there's that to consider, too.
Absolutely. There's a lot to consider. That's
Yeah,
why
there's
this is
a
a
lot
big,
to consider.
big nut to crack.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, why don't we move on to option 3, and then we have option 4, and then we'll wrap up.
Great. So option 3 would be locating some town programs into the community center. So in this scheme, we would look to move portions of the town hall program and services into the community center. In this case, we were looking at town administration, HR, accounting, finance, treasurer, collector, assessor, community wellness, and veteran services, continuing to keep Board of Health, land use, building, conservation, and town clerk at the existing town hall, and possibly looking to connect those two parcels. I know they do connect kind of behind that private property now, which is where that parking solution is currently proposed. So looking at relocating those, recreation remaining within, and then also co-locating that with the technology department, which would free up the technology building, and then possibly relocating facilities administration out from within Millennium Building into that as well. So in this case, the center fire station would become available for reuse or decommissioning. So the existing town hall police campus would still have police on it. It would still have some town hall functions on it, but some of those would be relocated into the community center. And then the other buildings would kind of stay in their current location and current configuration.
And it displaces the community center.
And it displaces the community center as part of that solution, yes.
Are those temporary moves or are they permanent moves? Like, how long would they be in those locations?
This would be a permanent solution in this possible option. And again, we kind of started with each of these options as these are 4 potential options. There's many more options. We're kind of trying to get a sense of any non-starters, initial feedback to any of these kind of possible scenarios. So everything's kind of on the table at this point.
So acknowledging the limited census pool of the previous exercise, of the number of people that did respond, there was a big sentiment for the significance of Road and Bush and for the significance of it staying at its current function. So I'd love to hear if that is a broader consensus. So I think that's a question we need to continue to seek feedback on.
Right. And if people aren't comfortable sharing that tonight, we're happy to receive that as well over the next few weeks to, we know this is a lot to take in, and if people aren't in these buildings every day and understanding the functions, it takes some time to get your bearings straight.
And
Is there some way to look at the cost of the various options to see how much the town would spend to go through the option during the period of change? And then the landing spot where we land, there was a mention of lost tax base if we bought a building. But on the other hand, there's a cost of building the building, there's a cost of moving all these organizations and so on. And the added square footage is obviously going to jack up the cost to the town, which is going to have to be planned into the budget in the
So
future.
I'm just going to pause 1 second. Were other people able to hear that comment at home?
Probably not. So we are asking people to come to the microphone if they have comments. But do you want to summarize that,
we can
Jeff?
summarize.
Yeah, so the question was, is there a way to look at the cost implications of, to make a comparison for some of these scenarios? And yes, that is actually part of the next step that we'll be doing. We wanted to get some of these big ideas out and see where the non-starters are. There's lots of reasons a project could be a non-starter. Cost is a big one of them. But, that's sort of emotional. No, I don't want to lose the community center, could be one. No, I don't want to see the town hall move, could be one. No, I don't want to drive all the way to Abbott, could be one. So we're trying to get some of those out of the way and narrow down the field. But then we will investigate, okay, what if we were going to follow through on any of these or another scenario, what does it cost? What is it, what do we have to do to the buildings to make it happen? What do we, what could we get by selling an asset? What would the renovations or whatever changes cost? Ultimately, I think we can't narrow down to a single solution until we've done that process so that we can compare and contrast.
So we do have two questions or comments.
Great.
Why are we discussing studying an area for moving services from Town Hall and Road and Bush to Abbott if the Mentimeter survey showed that these buildings' use, function, and design are significant and should stay in place? And why spend money on a non-starter? So I just want to remind the audience that we prepared this presentation before we received the survey. So again, as Rebecca and Jeff have said, we're gathering your feedback. We're going to crunch that and come back to you on April 5th with more information. So hopefully that's helpful answer to you. And if it's not, feel free to give our office a call. And then the other is from April Lanciati. When Road and Bush was under renovation, they were forced to close the school age program due to lack of certified space. So we'll just take note of that. Thank you, April.
And to add a little context relative to the community center and every building here, kind of from an existing condition standpoint, as you can imagine, depending on how much we touch these older buildings, especially ones that are a little bit more historic in nature or who have multiple vintages, there's a lot of potential additive cost the more we touch those facilities. And so in an effort to kind of bring them up to accessibility standards in current code, we also want to understand the reality of renovating a space like that, the challenges of taking different types of program and putting it into a building where it doesn't exist today. So we are kind of taking a more technical deep dive into all of these pieces, and to Jeff's point, that will help inform our solutions as well, and the cost ramifications of potentially doing something like that.
Yeah, along the lines of what you just said, I think some of the discussion of moving people around and functions around, depending on what building we move them to and what we plan to use with the building for future use. I saw some of the earlier, I was listening to this on Zoom.
Oh, great.
And I could hear you talking about different functions in different buildings. The current use with the building is just fine. We don't have to do any reconstruction or construction to meet certain disability needs and so on. But if we change the function, we have to add elevators and access and all kinds of things.
Exactly. And I think another consideration from an energy code standpoint is, to what extent as a green community and anything taking that further is how do we, handle kind of those life cycle and utility and maintenance costs. So we kind of have to look holistically too, is what are those kind of project costs as we renovate day one, but then what does that solution ultimately look like long term, and how does that impact kind of operational budget, maintenance budgets, et cetera. So yeah, looking kind of holistically at every solution will be really critical in this next step.
Why don't we go to option 4 and then
Great.
We'll open it up.
So the last option is to create a town hall campus. So in this scheme, the first critical move would be to move police off campus. So we would take the police department and move them to a different site to be determined. That would be developed as kind of a public safety campus or a police station site. And then this would open up the existing town hall campus to kind of expand the current town hall functions and incorporate in the technology department. So again, in this scheme, we move police off-site to a different location. We kind of relocate some of those town hall programmatic elements or services or departments potentially into the police building. We could also look at opportunities to leverage the center fire station, or maybe that becomes available for reuse or decommissioning, but essentially that entire campus and all the buildings on it could be a part of a solution that consolidates all of those town services onto the town campus. This would still allow for the technology building to also become available for reuse or decommissioning by incorporating them in. This could also potentially explore moving facilities administration out of the Millennium Building. You could kind of right-size this solution depending on how kind of deep you wanted to go into some of those other locations. But this is in an effort to kind of create a town hall campus only at the current location by kind of taking one of those pieces of program off of that site.
Would it keep communications?
Do you want to come to the mic? Sorry.
Would communications move off-site, or would it stay where it is?
Go ahead.
Yeah, based on the adjacency exercise we did with staff, it would probably move off-site.
Moved off-site?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not sure if I remember all the details from all the options, but do you have any options where you actually construct a new building or buy a new building, move certain functions into it, and then consolidate functions into the older buildings? So you minimize the amount of movement that has to be done?
This one.
Yeah, I think there's options on here that would require that could require that. We've talked about, if we did a new construction somewhere, does that, move one department once and then allow for us to just kind of renovate within? It alleviates kind of a constraint of sorts. I think the one thing that so yes, the short answer is yes, there are options on the table that are exploring that. I think one thing to consider that we discussed with the department heads is what program makes that move first, because that becomes an enabling project for the subsequent program, like for the subsequent development or the subsequent renovations. And one thing that was really important to the departments and the community is that we are prioritizing the greatest need as a part of these solutions. I think there was a fear that if we've got multiple each of these are going to kind of require some multiple steps. To what extent could vary on the option. To your point, we could reduce the amount of moves by being strategic about kind of relieving some pressure at one location. That's a great point. But is that the department that has the greatest need? Because that project's going to have to go first. So I think they're looking at kind of that overall 10-year plan and making sure that the entire thing is actionable, supportable, and can be funded so that all of those needs are met. And that you're kind of prioritizing those greatest needs kind of in order over time. So that it'll just become a part of the equation when we look at each of those options.
So there's a question from Amanda Sullivan. Outside of public opinion and thoughts regarding the use of 65 Main Street, so that's the Road and Bush Main Community Center building, what else is supporting the conversation and the finalization of these tentative moves? And I think the moves we're looking at are potentially permanent, but I'll let you speak to that.
Can you
Yeah, I'll read it again. Outside of public opinion and thoughts regarding the use of 65 Main Street, what else is supporting the conversation and the finalization of these tentative moves?
So any move specific to the community center is the question.
I believe so. Amanda, do you want me to, I can unmute you and if you want to help us understand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Amanda, how are you?
Hi. So yeah, I was just curious about, I know I'm hearing a lot about like the tentative possibilities, and I understand that all of those possible moves were going to be a permanent kind of solution to obviously the space needs of the town. But I was just curious because I was hearing a lot about, getting public opinion and insight and kind of ideas from everybody about what actually needs to happen from that space. Like how is that final decision going to be made? It's just, this is all this portion of this conversation is actually very new to me. So I was just curious if you could just clarify about like what that push would need to look like in order to, make those decisions final.
So, I think what we're going to end up doing in this next phase is evaluating a few different options. I'm not sure whether or not some or all of them will be what's on the screen. I think some of them will be. But it goes to that question of, well, what does this cost? What is the impact? What are the difficulties of getting there? And so I think, one of the things we've already started doing some code research on a number of these buildings and looking at where those challenges for relocating functions would be. So for instance, speaking to the Road and Bush in particular, we've got to see the functions that we identified that could move in there. How do they really fit in there? Because if they don't fit well and require more extensive renovation, we could find this being more costly than it's worth. And we might find that a different solution that may be equally acceptable Is it a better cost point? So there's a lot of technical aspects of, working the solution from the big ideas that we're talking about today before we get to that litmus test of, is this the right idea? I don't know many communities these days where cost isn't a big part of that conversation.
So
Thank you.
I would like to see the cost, but I'd also like to see what's already invested. So for communications, for example, I think they came 3 times to town meeting to get more money, and then we also did the antenna. So if we move them all out and just say the costs in their new spot is 10 million, but you're also sitting on 5 million that you invested that's worth nothing. And, Robinson's a good example of that. We're going to tear it down, possibly. We're still paying for windows until 2037, 2034. So I'd like to know not only the cost, but also what the investment is that we're leaving on the table.
Yeah, and when you're looking at a newer building as compared to some of the older buildings, that's always a more difficult choice. So I would certainly understand not wanting to relocate an asset where you've already made a big investment. I think when we threw this one out there was, the question, is everybody going to go, no way? Just for that reason.
But it depends on what people know, too, which is why I think it
Yep.
depends on what people know. People have short memories on some things. People might not
I think
know
that's-
that there was all that investment in the communication center, or that we're still
That's a
paying
great
for it.
data point we can include in
I would like
the study.
absolutely.
So there's a question online from Phil Harmon, and then, sir, I'll let you. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Steve.
Steve, nice to meet you.
Yes. Hi, I just wanted to, so far I'm looking at this, and option 2 seems like a, forward-thinking plan. It keeps with the architectural character of the town, and it also provides, ample space over there at Abbott for expansion if necessary. I mean, this is something I can appreciate the town doing. It's forward-thinking, and you're using capital investment to improve the town, and the consolidation of things would allow for savings on a, annual budget. So I think it's an impressive option.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve, please.
Maybe another thing to consider, when we're looking at using buildings temporarily or permanently, if the school, Robinson School, could be reused for one of these functions or a group of these functions without too much renovation versus rebuilding a school. Because if we build a new school and we renovate the building, we're going to get stuck with all kinds of requirements for upgrading the school, and we're going to be limited on how much funding we get from the state to build the school. If we build a new school, we get more funding and we have less requirements. So I'd ask you to look at the cost and the trade-offs of that state grant funding that we get for schools versus renovating a school.
Yeah, and that's under consideration by a separate committee. And I'm absolutely certain you're looking at those issues, right?
Yes, well, pending.
Pending town meeting approval.
Pending town meeting approval.
Together, it may weigh into you utilizing the
Oh,
school
absolutely.
as one of these functional buildings, and then going to find somewhere else to put the school.
Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah, this is one of those things, you touch one building, and all of a sudden it starts opening up other questions, and you can create such a web of possibilities that you could spend years and years and years studying it, and nobody wants to spend the money to do that. So through this exercise, we're hoping that we can start consolidating into some really good schemes that make sense to do deeper study on.
So there's also, Bob Jeffries has his hand raised, so I'm going to unmute him.
Great.
Bob, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are you coming up with rough estimates of each of these estimates?
When we settle on a number of different options that we're going to include in the report, yes, we will come up with order of magnitude numbers for each of them.
Because you're going to have to combine what the schools think their building costs are. And they've gotten really out of hand lately. In any of these options where you're taking out the Abbott or even the Robinson, and once you take a school out, you can't put it back in service after 2 years. So it causes additional problems. If you decide you're not going to use the Robinson and you're going to convert it to something else, and when the population comes back, and it will, we're going to start building schools again.
Yeah.
So as part of the,
real problem with accessing schools, using them for new uses, and then when the new population comes in, what do? And I'll give you a simple example. Boston Road, when we moved in with kids. That was a first. And we now have, I think, 12 school-age kids on the road. So it's already recycled.
Yeah.
And they're going to hit the schools. They've already hit the schools in some cases. And we've gone through this cycle probably 3 times already. So I'm really cautioning against doing anything where you start recycling schools for new uses and then you have to build new schools, because new schools are really expensive. And if people think that the state's going to pick up the cost, it's not going to happen for us.
So as part of the Robinson School Building Committee and the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, they are actually looking at our population projections for the next 20 to 30 years. We're also factoring in the MBTA zoning and other potential housing developments that come into play. So we're certainly not going in blind when if the town meeting approves this feasibility study, and the town will certainly have further say in that moving forward with these opportunities for study. So, Bob, we appreciate your insight from your time in town.
I have one more question. Have you talked to George Murray about these predictions?
So the MSBA actually does their own predictions based upon...
No, the question I asked was, have you asked George Murray? Because we looked at what George Murray predicted, and we looked at what the state's building authority looked at, and one of them is really good, and the other is really bad.
I do not know that. I will ask the
George
superintendent.
Murray to talk to.
Okay. George Murray has been active in doing some school studies. He's a town resident. He's been at some of the meetings.
If I can speak to that one, I will say that Dr. Chu and Valerie Young and I have spent a considerable amount of time over the past few months. We've been doing our own internal audit, looking at potential efficiencies within all the school buildings if we were to, in fact, pursue a grade reconfiguration and move to a K-5 setup in the elementary schools. And George Murray's report that he did, I believe, back in 2014, has been heavily referenced throughout all of those visits. So to answer your question, Bob, yes, we have been using some of that information, and I know that Dr. Chu has been in conversation with George.
Okay, good, thanks.
So we have one more comment about the cost estimating. One caution with the order of magnitude estimates, we've been significantly burdened by low estimates, quadrupling in implementation, fire station, library, 51 Main, admin building, Stony Brook Bridge rehab. I don't know how true that is because we're currently out to bid with the library, so we don't have those current, we think we're on estimate for that. We never went out to bid for 51 Main, so I don't know if this person is talking about cost estimates continuing to increase significantly or not, but I'll just leave that as a comment out there.
Yeah, from what I was gleaming is that there was a kind of a rough order of magnitude number thrown out at some point, and as the project developed, the costs increased and escalated. I think it's something that we have also seen, and for a variety of clients, I think we have to be really careful about how we use historic cost data in its application to kind of those rough order of magnitude budgets, and then making sure that they are escalated properly on a proper timeline. So I think that's where the CIP becomes really critical, is if it's not going to happen for 5 or 10 years, making sure that, you know, no one has a crystal ball, but making sure we were being conservative in those escalation numbers to make sure that, you know, because the reality of it is once a number is out there, that becomes the number, and you kind of, you know, it is more challenging, and in some cases, a non-starter to go back for more. So we want to make sure that we're thinking through those solutions holistically, so that if they're not going to happen for 10 years, that we're making sure that we escalate those appropriately. Anything you want to add?
So we have about 15 more minutes. I don't know if you want to go to your wrap-up slide or keep this up. don't see anything else online at this point in time.
Yeah, and just briefly on that cost question, you know, that's something we've been tracking an awful lot. We actually, we spoke at a national conference last year about it, and we're actually revisiting that discussion this year because, you know, there's been some crazy market conditions over the last few years, particularly up here in New England where we live. You know, I've seen national data from the last quarter of last year where, you know, we see escalation softening in a bunch of construction markets, but we're still seeing 5.4% in, you know, the Boston area, the greater Boston area. So, yeah, it's an important thing to be realistic about. And then, you know, I can tell you that no matter how good of a prognosticator you are, you do not know what market's going to be and what costs are going to be in 10 or 15 years. You can only do your best to create a range that protects your clients. So definitely, I think anything that comes out of this exercise is going to have, you know, a high-low range on it because it's too long a term to predict accurately.
Okay, so just to touch on one final, so it was mentioned at the beginning, but just to reiterate, there will be materials available at the annual town meeting on March 22nd, kind of with updates on where, you know, the options and the scenarios and what we're continuing to explore, and kind of giving a brief recap of those, of the different pieces of this that we've completed to date. We have numerous department head workshops that are going to occur between now and then, and over the months of February and March and into April. Our next community conversation is at the beginning of April. It is on a Saturday, so that we are envisioning that being a kind of same kind of time frame, but we are going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this draft master plan, and allow for some feedback on these solutions, having some of those costs as a part of that, and kind of all of those pieces pulled together, so that we can get some feedback on those solutions. And then again, to reiterate, all of this is summarized and all of this is available on the project website. And if you have any questions, we encourage you to email the project team and the town manager's office. We want to ensure that we are keeping everyone informed on kind of where we are at, and we welcome kind of that feedback, if you wish to share it.
Great. So thank you everyone for coming in person and on Zoom. Again, your feedback is really important. Please feel free to share this information with others. We're not done. We still have plenty of time for public input and communication. We know it was a busy night. There was a Commission on Disabilities meeting, Affordable Housing Trust, I'm sure other student activities and family activities. So we really appreciate the time that everyone took this evening. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.